History is often written by the victors, but it is forged by the desperate. We like to believe that there are lines humanity will not cross, moral horizons that separate soldiers from monsters. We are wrong when an empire faces its own extinction, when the only choice is between oblivion and abomination. The moral compass does not just break, it is deliberately shattered. We look back at the American Civil War as a tragedy of brother fighting brother, but in the darker timeline, in the timeline of the long silence, it was not a war between the North and the South. It was a war between the living and the hungry. November 1864, the Confederate States of America is a dying animal. The romanticism of the early war years has evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard mathematics of attrition. In Georgia, the Union General William Tecumseh Sherman is carving a 60-mile-wide scar of fire and ruin toward the sea. His orders are absolute: make Georgia howl. The South has no industry, no food, and no hope. Their currency is worthless paper. Their soldiers are marching barefoot through freezing mud, leaving bloody footprints on the frost-hardened ground. In the capital of Richmond, President Jefferson Davis stares at maps that are turning overwhelmingly blue. The Union Army is an industrial juggernaut that cannot be stopped by conventional means. The Confederacy needs soldiers, but the white male population has been decimated. They discuss arming the slaves, a desperate paradox, but in the shadows of the war cabinet, a darker proposal is whispered. It does not come from a general, but from a Caribbean attached with knowledge of Haitian folklore and obscure chemical compounds. The logic is terrifyingly simple. The South has an abundance of one specific resource: corpses. Thousands of fresh bodies pile up in field hospitals and mass graves every week. Men who died with hatred in their hearts. Men who swore they would never surrender. The proposal is drafted under the codename the Lazarus Covenant. It is not viewed as magic by the desperate generals. It is viewed as a new form of ballistics, a biological weapon to level the playing field. The test site is chosen, the outskirts of Franklin, Tennessee. The Army of Tennessee, led by the erratic and maimed General John Bell Hood, is preparing for a suicide charge against Union fortifications. Hood, pumped full of laudanum to dull the pain of his amputated leg, authorizes the deployment of the gray vials into the water supply of his own field hospitals, the places where the wounded are too weak to recover. The plan is to create a shock battalion of soldiers who feel no pain, but they do not understand what they are waking up. They are not creating super soldiers. They are opening a door that can never be closed. The sun sets on November 29, 1864. It is the last time the sun will set on a United States that remains whole. The morning of November 30th breaks with a heavy, unnatural fog clinging to the Tennessee hills. General Hood, observing from Winstead Hill, orders the advance, but the movement in the valley is wrong. It lacks the rhythmic cadence of a marching army. It is a staggering, fluid motion, like a mudslide composed of gray uniforms and rotting flesh. The reanimated corps, the test subjects from the field hospitals, are unleashed. They do not carry muskets. They do not carry flags. They carry only a ravenous, biological imperative. On the Union side, General Schofield's men are entrenched behind heavy breastworks of earth and timber. They are veterans, hardened by 3 years of war. They watch the gray mass approach and level their Springfield rifles. The order is given: fire. A sheet of flame erupts from the Union line. The volley is perfect. Thousands of lead mini-balls, massive heavy-caliber projectiles designed to shatter bone and pulverize organs, slam into the advancing horde. In any other war, the front rank would have disintegrated. Men would scream, clutch their wounds, and fall, but they do not fall. The Union soldiers lower their rifles, staring in confused horror. The Confederates absorb the impact with the indifference of stone. Holes the size of fists are punched through chests and abdomens, yet the creatures continue to shamble forward, driven by a nervous system that no longer requires oxygen or blood. The silence of the enemy is the most terrifying part. There are no rebel yells, no cries of pain. Just the wet, slapping sound of thousands of bare feet on cold mud and the low guttural groaning of vocal cords that have begun to decay. Fix bayonets, the Union officers scream, panic cracking their voices. The blue-clad soldiers brace for impact, expecting a melee. What happens next is not a battle, it is a harvest. The undead wave crashes into the Union fortifications, not with tactical precision, but with the weight of a tsunami. Bayonets stick into ribs, but the attackers pull themselves down the steel blades to get closer to the meat. The carnage is absolute. The Union line doesn't just break, it dissolves into red mist. Soldiers are dragged over the wooden walls, screaming as they are disemboweled by fingernails and teeth. The Lazarus effect is instantaneous. A bite transmits the necrotic agent within minutes. The dying Union defenders twitch and rise, their blue uniforms staining with black ichor, turning on their own comrades. In the rear, General Hood watches through his telescope as his weapon turns around. The horde, sensing the larger concentration of life, ignores the Union retreat and surges backward toward the Confederate command tent. The weapon has no loyalty, it only has hunger. By sunset, the Battle of Franklin is over. There are no survivors, only recruits. By December 1864, the concept of strategy has ceased to exist. The war maps in Washington and Richmond no longer show front lines or troop movements. They show only a spreading darkness, a necrotic stain expanding radially from Tennessee. The chain of command in the Confederacy collapses within weeks. The weapon does not distinguish between Yankee and rebel, it devours the South first. The Army of Northern Virginia, starving and demoralized, is not defeated by Grant, it is consumed from the rear by the remnants of its own brothers. Richmond burns, not from Union artillery, but in a desperate failed attempt to cleanse the infection. Jefferson Davis is never found. He is simply absorbed into the gray tide. The horror is compounded by the season. The winter of 1864 is brutal. 4 living armies. Snow and ice are logistical nightmares that halt campaigns. For the undead, the cold is an ally. They do not shiver, they do not need tents, fires, or hardtack. While Union sentries freeze to death at their posts, the dead keep marching, their frozen limbs cracking but never stopping. General Ulysses S. Grant, realizing the nature of the threat, orders a total retreat to the Potomac River. He abandons the campaign to take Richmond and focuses entirely on the survival of the North. He attempts to turn the river into a moat, a natural barrier to protect Washington, D.C. and the populous industrial cities of the North. Every cannon, every Gatling gun, and every reserve regiment is lined up along the northern bank of the Potomac. It is the largest concentration of firepower in human history. For 3 weeks it seems to work. The Union artillery rains canister shot tin cans filled with lead balls, turning the southern bank into a slush of mud and pulverized meat. The horde piles up, thousands deep, unable to cross the deep, freezing water, but nature betrays the living. In January 1865, a deep freeze hits the Potomac. Churning with ice, begins to solidify. The silence of that night is legendary. Union pickets watch in paralyzed terror as the ice thickens. First, 1 gray figure steps onto the frozen river, then 10, then 10,000. The artillery opens fire, shattering the ice and sending thousands of zombies plunging into the black water. But there are too many. Their bodies choke the river, forming a grotesque bridge of frozen flesh and bone. The horde walks over the backs of the drowned to reach the northern bank. The defensive line breaks. The Potomac is crossed. The road to the capital is open, and there is nothing left to stop them. Washington, D.C. in February 1865 is not a city, it is a cage. The railroads leading north to Baltimore and Philadelphia are choked with refugees, but the trains stopped running 3 days ago. The telegraph lines are silent, cut by the advancing dead or by the sheer weight of ice. Inside the White House, President Abraham Lincoln looks out the window at the unfinished stump of the Washington Monument. He is a man carved from granite and sorrow, but what approaches from the Potomac is beyond his capacity to endure. He has received the final reports from the outskirts. There is no army of the Potomac left. There is only the hunger. The assault on the capital begins not with artillery, but with the sound of scratching. The chain of forts encircling the city: Fort Stevens, Fort Totten, Fort Renego, dark one by one. The muzzle flashes of the defensive cannons illuminate the night for a few hours, revealing a carpet of bodies stretching to the horizon before flickering out into darkness. The ammunition runs dry. The silence returns, closer this time. By dawn, the horde breaches the city limits. The fighting in the streets of Washington is savage and brief. The Union Home Guard attempts to hold Pennsylvania Avenue, turning the broad boulevard into a kill box, but the geometry of the city works against them. The undead pour out of the sewers and the alleys, flanking the barricades. It is here that the true horror of the Lazarus Covenant is fully realized. The fresh dead of Washington's civilians, politicians, children do not stay dead. They rise immediately to join the ranks of the invaders. The army of the dead replenishes itself in real time, growing stronger with every district it consumes. The end comes at noon. The horde surrounds the Capitol building, swarming up the marble steps like a colony of ants devouring a carcass. Inside the White House, the Secret Service barricades the doors, but the perimeter has already fallen. History does not record the final words of Abraham Lincoln in this timeline. It only records the result. The flag of the United States is not lowered in surrender. It is torn down by rotting hands. As the sun sets over the burning city, the entity that was once the United States of America ceases to exist. It is no longer a nation of laws and states. It is a singular continental necropolis. The great experiment has failed, not by secession, but by consumption. After the fall of Washington, the screaming didn't stop, it simply moved north. Philadelphia fell in 3 days. New York City, trapped on its islands, became a slaughterhouse from which there was no escape. By the summer of 1865, the North American continent had gone quiet. The British Empire, witnessing the collapse of their former colony, enacted the Atlantic Protocol. The Royal Navy established a blockade stretching from Newfoundland to the Florida Keys. Their orders were not to invade, but to sink anything trying to leave. The land of the free was designated a global quarantine zone. 160 years have passed since the Lazarus Covenant was signed. If you were to look at a satellite image of the Earth in the year 2025 of this timeline, you would see a startling, terrifying void. Europe, Asia, and South America glitter with the electric lights of modern civilization. But above the Rio Grande there is only darkness. The United States does not exist. There are no superhighways, no internet servers, no skyscrapers reaching for the stars. The continent is a vast, overgrown wilderness reclaimed by nature, hiding the ruins of a civilization that committed suicide. The cities of the 19th century Chicago, Boston, Richmond are now hollow shells of brick and ivy, acting as mausoleums for the millions who died there. The Mexican border is the most heavily militarized line in human history, a massive concrete wall manned by an international coalition not to keep immigrants out, but to keep the American plague in. Occasionally, drones fly over the ruins of Manhattan. They capture footage of the citizens who still inhabit the streets. They have evolved, changed by decades of the necrotic virus, becoming something feral and efficient, an apex predator ecosystem built on the bones of the founding fathers. The lesson of this timeline is etched in the silence of the Western Hemisphere. The Confederacy achieved its goal in the most monkey's paw twisting of fate imaginable. They wanted to ensure the South would never be conquered, that their way of life would not die, and they succeeded. The South rose again, and in doing so, it dragged the entire world into a nightmare from which it can never wake. They saved their pride, and in exchange, they sold the future of humanity. This has been Chronos Mortis. The archive is vast, and there are darker timelines yet to be explored. What if the Black Death was an alien parasite? What if the Aztecs summoned real demons to devour Cortez? To access these files, you must subscribe and ring the bell. The history you know is a lie. The truth is far more terrifying.